Final Fantasy XIV stands at a crossroads that we haven't seen since A Realm Reborn. It's leaving a lot of players with a lot of questions because the future of the game is relatively unclear. Now, I want to give a little bit of background because many of the viewers from my channel don't know my opinions on Final Fantasy XIV, let alone that I'm a player that's been to FanFest and may or may not have some character art of their cat girl, safe for work only, by the way, degenerates. But to say that I'm invested in the future of the game would be an understatement. I love Final Fantasy XIV. I would say that Terraria is the game that changed the way that I interact with and play games, but Final Fantasy XIV is the game that taught me how to emotionally resonate with a story and enjoy a narrative on a completely different level. Final Fantasy XIV likely influences the way that I write scripts for my videos, how I even portray myself in front of a camera, so I am eternally grateful for that. But I'm sitting here asking the question that many other players are. After 10 years of success, after a decade-long epic story, what does a post-Endwalker world look like? And can this success continue? Final Fantasy XIV has experienced a remarkable journey since its initial release. The game's original launch back in 2010 was met with significant criticism due to various issues and just not meeting players' expectations. However, under the leadership of Naoki Yoshida, the game underwent a complete overhaul, developing an entirely different MMO while still supporting the older version, culminating in the literal destruction of the original Final Fantasy XIV and the birth of A Realm Reborn in 2013. This relaunch was a critical success, breathing new life into the game and laying the foundation for its future growth. Since then, Final Fantasy XIV has seen a rise in popularity, bolstered by the successive expansions like Heavensward, Stormblood, and Shadowbringers. Each expansion brought with it new stories, lands to explore, and gameplay improvements, further cementing the game's reputation in the MMO industry. The release of Endwalker in 2021 marked a high point in this journey. It not only received widespread acclaim, but also saw a surge of players and veterans coming from all kinds of different areas and different MMOs. The consistent popularity of Final Fantasy XIV can be attributed to its engaging storytelling, vibrant community, regular content updates, and consistently exceeding player expectations. The game has become a cornerstone in the lives of many players, those invested in the game's story, its characters, and the friends that they've made along the way. For many players, the world of Eorzea is a place where they belong. However, Final Fantasy XIV isn't without its issues, and those issues, coupled with the uncertainty of stepping into a post-Endwalker world, have left many players in a state of cautious anticipation. The community, having been part of this decade-long, richly woven narrative, now faces a future where the direction of the game is a little bit less clear. While there is excitement about new stories and adventures, the apprehension about how gameplay and content concerns will be addressed ongoing still hangs on in the background. As Final Fantasy XIV moves forward, the balance between maintaining the essence of the game and evolving to meet player expectations will be key in sustaining its dedicated player base and attracting new fans. I've played Final Fantasy XIV for roughly 5 years now, and I play it the same way that I believe many other players do. I come in for the story, I enjoy the story, I stick around for a couple Savage Tiers, have an absolutely fantastic time, go to dip my toes into an ultimate, get to the actual final phase of the ultimate, but then the party ends up falling apart because there's some weird internal conflict between two players. They were probably dating or something like that. The party falls apart. I got to go to Party Finder, which means that it's just not going to happen anymore. And then I quit, and then I go back to my backlog, or I just enjoy not having a raid schedule for a while. It's like a cycle. It happens every single time to me. But outside of that, I don't have a lot of concerns with Final Fantasy XIV. There are areas of weakness that I definitely recognize they could work on, but we'll see how they handle that stuff in the future. I would like to see more mid-core content, something between Savage and Casual, where maybe you have some type of meaningful progression that doesn't funnel you into have to doing 8-man raids. But outside of that, I do believe that a lot of the concerns that the community has is actually inspired by how diverse the community has gotten because of the Endwalker boom. There is a massive influx of players from all kinds of different games, different walks of life, different areas of the world that are now playing Final Fantasy XIV, and they have completely different needs and opinions on the game's future and what the game already has to offer. So let's talk about that. A recent article from PC Gamer sums up players' concerns relatively well, titled, "2024 is going to be a defining year for Final Fantasy XIV and maybe Square Enix's last chance to tackle its stagnating formula." Molly Taylor writes, "The air around Dawntrail, Final Fantasy XIV's upcoming expansion, is decidedly different to how things were in the run-up to 2021's Endwalker. It makes sense, really. We're not in the throes of a global pandemic, nor are there thousands of WoW refugees departing from Blizzard's MMO for greener, more catboy pastures. We're not on the cusp of a major narrative climax either, wrapping up a decade-long story. It's the total opposite. Dawntrail is the start of a new arc, more low-key than what our Warriors of Light have been put through in the last several years. The joys of exploration and adventuring are perhaps a little bit less hypeable and marketable than world-ending apocalyptic threats, but I don't think it's the only reason that things feel a little bit more tentative this time around. And while Dawntrail's story may be low stakes, community reception and success feels critical for defining how the next several years of Final Fantasy XIV will look. I say things feel tentative as PCG's fellow Final Fantasy XIV enthusiast Harvey Randall puts it. It's been 2 years of frustration for many players. Post-Endwalker patches have been subject to a hefty amount of criticism, more than I ever remember in my 9 years of on and off playing. The issues Harvey outlines, slow story, lack of mid-core content, and unsatisfying relic grind, have been shared across the wider community. It's hard to feel like there hasn't been an ever-growing exhaustion with the formula that Square Enix has so stalwartly stuck to for the last several years. Alliance raids always come in odd-number patches, Savage raids come in even-number patches, dungeons and trials typically occur the same time each expansion. There's always a dungeon at level 61, 71, and 81, a trial at level 63, 73, and 83. While it's never been something that I found particularly bothersome, I'm a creature of habit, it's a sentiment that I haven't been able to avoid as the community has shared their thoughts over the past several months. Now, I think there's something to that, but it's also a double-edged sword, because you do want to shake things up and surprise the player base here and there, but you don't want to stray too far from the formula because you risk the dedicated player base not having their expectations met. Say that you have people, which there are a lot of folks that are just raid loggers. They wait for those even number patches, they come in, they do their raids, and then they take off. But if you don't do a raid in an even number patch, well, then what are they going to come back for? And that's where the idea that I brought up earlier of having some type of other sort of meaningful progression for players to have might become a little bit more useful. Because if you do want to shake things up and you want to swap what patches different things come out, or the way that we interact with raids entirely, well, you have to have other passive progression for other players to be able to engage with. You have to give more things for us to do rather than just continue to do the same things over and over and over again. Now, while it would be great to have that, that ends up being a double-edged sword, because if you're doing that, well, then the game doesn't have that predictability that allows people to kind of schedule their life around how they play Final Fantasy XIV. So it's a relatively dangerous place to step into, but it's an interesting topic nevertheless. Molly continues with, that's not to say that Square Enix didn't try to shake things up a bit with Endwalker. Variant and Criterion dungeons were attempts to offer up a new way to play dungeons that had soloable, casual difficulty with branching paths, and then a tough-as-nails version that would require considerable coordination and a full party to tackle. The problem is that the difficulty outweighed the rewards Criterion dungeons offered, leaving little motivation to continue slamming heads against a wall that wasn't willing to cough up anything good for the effort. There was the Island Sanctuary too, a casual farming and crafting mode that quickly descended into a set-it-and-forget-it spreadsheet simulator. That's not a criticism of the community, I can't blame anyone for it happening. Later levels are incredibly grindy, and once you're maxed out, the mode is a game of grinding enough currency to scoop up all the cosmetics and mounts. It was another attempt to do something new that just slightly missed the mark, and perhaps arguing in Square Enix's favor to stick to the recipe that serves so well for many expansions, even as a portion of the player base becomes tired of it. The likelihood of Dawntrail tackling any of these larger criticisms is minimal, which makes it so much more vital that whatever it brings to the table absolutely bangs. Part of that will hopefully be its graphical update, an attempt to make the game look slightly less than a decade old. While that won't make things more engaging to play, it'll hopefully make it a lot more interesting to look at. And I think bringing up the areas where Square Enix did try to do something new is really important, because while those systems were fun to engage with initially, they lost some of their popularity as time went on because they just either weren't that rewarding or weren't that fun to engage with. Now, that's not to say that players didn't enjoy those things. There are plenty of players that did. I did enjoy the Criterion dungeons, but by the time it came for me to try to do the more difficult versions of those, I didn't really care that much because the rewards, well, weren't all that rewarding. And the reason why that those systems are like that is because Square Enix likes to try to take the safe path, which, respect to them, they do it because they want to try to make sure that they include as many players as possible. They don't want to leave people out of something. But at the same time, by doing that and not taking any risks and not trying to do anything really that new, well, you're leaving a lot on the table that really could make the game better overall. this is just an example and an opinion, but if they would have took a route with the variant dungeons or criteria, which one's the more difficult one? I can't remember. But if they would have took those dungeons, that smaller group content, 4-player, and actually made it a mode of meaningful progression where you actually did get gear that then gave you access to higher tiers of difficulty, that then would actually have cross progression with raiding if you wanted to go do Savage, and maybe some of that equipment would be usable there, just as we already have with crafting. It would give players a different way to go about things rather than just go, I'm getting my bis in crafting and then I go into the Savage raids. Well, instead they could go, well, I could do that, or I could go do this instead. There's other ways for them to tackle this content, to give players something else to do. Some players want smaller, more difficult content. Some players want bigger, more difficult content. Some players don't want difficult content at all. And it's their responsibility to do their best to try to provide as much of that content to as many players as possible. And I realize that they want to try to take the position of, well, we don't want to keep players in the game all the time forever. It's okay if you want to take a break. And I think that that's great. But you should also still try to pay attention to the players that do want to stay in the game all the time. As Final Fantasy XIV embarks on a new journey with its 2024 expansion, the game stands at a pivotal crossroads. This expansion, arriving on the heels of the monumental Endwalker, is not just an addition to the game's storied history. It represents a new start, something very much in theme with Dawntrail. The anticipation surrounding the expansion is mixed with a palpable sense of curiosity and unease for the player base. After a decade-long narrative that's been incredibly engaging and emotionally resonant, the question on everyone's mind is, what's next? Dawntrail carries the weighty task of charting an unexplored course for Final Fantasy XIV. Players are looking forward to more than just new quests and new areas. They seek a continuation of the immersive storytelling that has been the game's hallmark, along with innovations that can reinvigorate their experience. The community's concerns regarding class homogenization, the desire for more mid-core content, and the need to break the more repetitive cycle of updates has come to be something that they want to see addressed. How the developers respond to these challenges and integrate player feedback into the upcoming expansion is going to be crucial. Moreover, this expansion presents a unique opportunity for the developers to redefine what Final Fantasy XIV means in the current MMO landscape. It's a chance to introduce new gameplay mechanics, expand on existing lore, and explore fresh narrative themes. The potential for evolving class dynamics, introducing unexpected plot twists, and offering new forms of engagement is immense. Such changes could invigorate the existing player base while also attracting new players to the game. While the upcoming graphical update stands to modernize the game significantly, it's definitely something that players have been looking forward to for a while. I do feel as though the player base expects and is looking for something more, something that we wouldn't normally expect. And by the way, none of this is a doomer approach to Final Fantasy XIV's expansion. It's actually quite the opposite, because I think Final Fantasy XIV's success brings all of this into context. If it wasn't for the success of the game, they wouldn't be looking at some of the challenges that they have ahead of them. Because of their success, they have created this incredibly diverse and huge group of players that have all kinds of different needs and expectations for the game going on into the future. And it's not just the new players that have come into the game. No, it's much, much more than that, actually. You have to think about it. It's been 10 years of this game going on, more than 10 years now, which has given us the opportunity to play 10 years of other games as well, bringing new expectations and innovations to the industry, to the medium, and to everything else. And it's Square Enix's responsibility to make sure that they're doing their best to adapt to that and to navigate that and bring that to the players to raise Final Fantasy XIV to an all-new level. And now I have relatively tempered expectations. Sorry about the cat. I have relatively tempered expectations when it comes to game studios. However, I do have a couple of weaknesses. Larian Studios and Creative Business Unit 3. If there was one studio that I knew could do it, one studio that could definitely take Dawntrail off into the future and make Final Fantasy XIV even more successful than it is right now, it's Naoki Yoshida and the team over there at Square Enix. It is an incredible group that they have that genuinely loves the game, plays the game, and wants their players to be happy. Because of that, I'm not really that worried. While I think it's valuable to have these kind of discussions, talk about the things that we want to see in the game in the future, talk about the problems that we're having playing the game, I have full faith that they're going to do just fine. So yeah, that's all I got for the video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you guys did, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, drop a comment, stick around, join the Discord. We have a podcast every Sunday at 2 p.m. PST, 2:30 p.m. PST. And yeah, that's it. So stay cool, stay righteous, stay safe, my friends. Thank you guys for watching the video, and I will see you in Eorzea. Peace.